Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Grace. It is lovely to have you here. Today we are doing a proper final wrap up of all the 56 books I read last year in 2024 via the classic method of tier ranking. I had an interesting reading year in 2024. I read a lot more than I have in the past, but I had a lot of kind of mid books, I would say, or at least for me a lot of them were kind of middle of the road. I wasn't as invested as I wanted to be. I found a few new favourites amidst those, but I'd say for the number of books that I read there weren't as many that I loved as I would have hoped for. But let me stop rambling and get into it. I will show you my tiers to start off with. So at the top we have new all-time favourite, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, but this for me is probably going to be very few books. If you watched my recent video where I desperately hunted for a new all-time favourite, a new 5-star book, then you will know it's very difficult for me because I am incredibly fussy and it's such a nebulous thing for me. So this is going to be a small category. Underneath that we have finally some good food, which maybe is a bit harsh to the rest of these books. It doesn't mean that any books below here were bad and I didn't enjoy them. It just means that these were books that I was finally excited about again. There are other books on this list that I did enjoy and I had fun with while I was reading them, but these were the ones that I was like, this is gonna stick with me. And like I said, I kind of struggled to find that this year. Under that we have A Solidly Good Time, which is a solidly good time. This is for books that I enjoyed reading, I had a fun time with. Maybe they won't stick with me in quite the same way, but I probably still would recommend them, especially if I thought they would fit someone's taste especially. And then under that we have I Don't Know How to Feel, which is for books that I had mixed feelings about basically. Any books that I enjoyed parts of, but some parts frustrated me, or I came away kind of unsure if I enjoyed the book or not. Anything like that is going in I Don't Know How to Feel. And then at the bottom we have Just Respectfully No. These are either books that I personally didn't think were that great, or just books that didn't work for me. Maybe they might work for someone else, but they really didn't suit my taste. So for me, respectfully, it has to be a no. If you can't tell, I don't like being mean about books. I'm not here to roast anything. So those are my categories. Let's get into the 56 books that I read in 2024. So off the bat we have an interesting one. We have A Dark and Drowning Tide, which I'm gonna put in I Don't Know How to Feel. I was so excited for this book and it kind of let me down. I didn't hate it, but it was a bit of a slog to get through. There were parts that I enjoyed, but even looking back, I think the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that was questionable. I'm not sure about that decision. I think on a base level the writing was decent, but the plot decisions and character decisions I couldn't really get behind. And there were some interesting takes on colonialism in here. So yeah, it didn't live up to the expectations that I had for it, because that was probably my most anticipated book of the year. I was so excited for that one. It was a sapphic fantasy murder mystery with folklore. That sounds like my perfect book to a T, but alas. Next up we have Thorn Hedge, which I think I'm gonna put in A Solidly Good Time. I did enjoy this one. I'd say it's probably at the top of this category, near the top of it. I think sometimes it can just be hard for a really short book to fully hit me emotionally. But this was fun. This was classic T. Kingfisher, a little bit creepy, but more heartwarming than you might expect, flipping a fairy tale on its head as she loves to do. I enjoyed it for what it was. I don't know if it will become a favourite that I would want to reread, but definitely a solidly good time. Then we have a poetry book. We have A Recipe for Sorcery by Vanessa Kisule. I read this for like a poetry video I was doing where I was reading and writing poetry, trying to get back into it. I really enjoyed this. This is definitely the best poetry book I read last year. Not that there were that many, but I thought this was great and I would like to reread this at some time. I'm gonna pop this up in Finally Some Good Food. And then we have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Of course this is going in Finally Some Good Food, although there is another Emily Henry on this list and it might not end up here. Book Lovers I loved. I was crying my eyes out. I was having a great time. This reminded me about how much I love books as well, because the two main characters are just obsessed with stories, and it was a great time. Emily Henry lives on to be one of my favourite authors ever. Then we have Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, a classic of the cozy fantasy genre. I'm gonna pop this in a solidly good time. I don't know if cozy fantasy is a genre that produces like 5-star books for me. I always have a fun time reading it. I'm never gonna complain at a cozy fantasy if it's well written, but I rarely get the intense emotional impact that I may be looking for. But I had a fun time with this. I think there were some flaws in the ways that the characters were written. I'd say that the two main characters were a bit too similar. It was hard for me to kind of distinguish between the two of them. It felt like they had the same flaws. But I had a fun time, and I did like that there was a little bit more action in here than just cozy times. There was a little bit more going on. Then we have Take a Hint, Danny Brown, which I think is gonna go in a solidly good time. Is it? It could go in finally some good food. I did really enjoy this one. I think it's at the top of a solidly good time for now, because I probably personally didn't quite connect to the characters, and this was probably a little bit heavy on the spice for me personally. That's not really what I'm looking for in a romance. I don't mind if it's there, but it's not what I'm actively looking for. So I can see why a lot of people love this one, and I definitely would read more from this author in the future. It was also set in my hometown, which was really fun. And I did actually really enjoy the male main character being such a softie. He's like a proper big burly guy, but he's such a sweetheart, and I really appreciated that. Very in touch with his feelings, which we appreciate in a male lead in a romance. Then we have The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I love this. I love this so much. This is going in finally some good food, definitely. This is so atmospheric and so gorgeously written. I've raved about it many times, so I won't go on too much, but creepier than I'd usually go for, so it was a fun surprise that I enjoyed it as much as I did, and I really want to read more from this author in the future. Then we have Enchantment by Catherine May. This is going in respectfully no. I'm so sorry. This wasn't for me. This wasn't for me. I'm not really a non-fiction girly thus far. I'm sure that there is non-fiction out there for me, but this isn't my kind of thing, I don't think. This is kind of a non-fiction book about trying to find that feeling of enchantment in the world again. And I think I was expecting something different than what it was. I was kind of expecting it to be more a guide for the reader, and it ended up more being kind of a memoir of the author's experiences, which just wasn't what I was looking for, and I was a little bit bored. Then we have Fangs, which is an adorable little graphic novel. I'm gonna pop this in a solidly good time. I don't think it can go any higher because this was really just cutesy. It was really sweet. I had fun. I read it in about 20 minutes, I'd say. It's a funny little graphic novel about a vampire and a werewolf who fall in love, and all of the antics that they get up to and the difficulties of that kind of relationship. Very fun, very cute, a little bit dark in a funny way. Then we have God Killer, which I enjoyed. I didn't love. I haven't continued the series yet. My boyfriend has read the second one and he did enjoy it. There were parts of this that I found really interesting, especially the actual god aspects of it. There is one perspective that you're following that is like this little god who's a little rabbit with antlers, and he was a great character. I really enjoyed him and the girl that he was connected to, but I wouldn't say I was ever fully invested, and it felt kind of a little underwhelming plot-wise, I would say. I say all of this with the caveat that I did enjoy it and I do want to continue the series. It just wasn't something I was obsessed with. So a solidly good time still. Then we have Hello Fungi. This is just a really cute little non-fiction graphic novel about mushrooms. It's aimed at kids, but I had a great time. I thought the illustrations were gorgeous and it had a lot of little cute facts about mushrooms. A solidly good time. Did what it said on the tin. Then we have Kiki's Delivery Service. This was cute. This was a cute little short coming of age book. I had an enjoyable time reading it. It won't really stick with me, but that's all right. That's gonna go in a solidly good time. And we have The Last Unicorn. Oh, I don't know. I don't know where to put this. I was really excited for this because this is a proper kind of classic of the fantasy genre, and a lot of people really love this book, but it just didn't quite work for me. I think I'm gonna have to put this in I Don't Know How to Feel. Please don't yell at me for that. I think it's mostly because my expectations for this book were high and it didn't live up to those. There were parts of this that were funny and insightful. It reminded me a little bit of Pratchett in the humour, but I just didn't feel that connected to any of the characters, and I kind of had to push myself through this one. I think it wouldn't be here if I hadn't expected it to be great, is the thing. But yeah, I don't know how to feel about that one. Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, a little graphic novel about a queer relationship that goes wrong. It's quite toxic. I'm gonna put this in a solidly good time. It did what it said on the tin. Although it's interesting because visually it kind of looks like it's gonna be a romance book, and I think a lot of people think that looking at it, and it's very much not. It was an interesting one. Then we have Lies We Sing to the Sea. This is definitely going and I don't know how to feel. I went into this one knowing there was controversy because this is a retelling of the Odyssey, or it was pitched as a retelling of the Odyssey, and then the author said that they'd never read the Odyssey and there was a whole thing about that. I don't think this is a retelling of the Odyssey. It's kind of inspired by it, but it's quite a loose inspiration. But I will still say that there were issues with this book. There were some plot points that didn't quite make sense to me, and then some of the main character's actions I think were pretty selfish, and I don't know if she was meant to be viewed that way. I don't mind if a character is selfish if that is the point, you know, but I don't know if it was deliberate. There were some questionable things going on, but it did make me cry at the end, so clearly it was doing something right, but definitely mixed feelings still. Then we have Morgan Is My Name, which is the first in a trilogy retelling the life of Morgan Le Fay. I had a great time with this one. It's very much my area. I love Arthurian legend and all of that, so I was expecting to love this one. I've said a few times I think this as a series could become a favourite for me, but I don't think individually the first one could be like an all-time favourite because it's very much just the first kind of chapter of her life. We have a lot more to see, but I really enjoyed it and I loved the audiobook. I will always rave about the audiobook version of this one. I thought it was really well done. Then we have The Gloaming. I think I'm gonna put this in I Don't Know How to Feel. This was weird. This is kind of magical realism. It's set in like a version of our world, but there are a lot of slightly magical things going on, or the writing is just kind of so ethereal and not quite grounded in reality that it always feels like there's something kind of magical going on. But I think I got a little bit lost. The writing was really gorgeous, but it was a little bit too non-specific and experimental for me personally, I think. It was an interesting one, and I think it definitely could be to some people's taste, but it didn't quite work for me. I wasn't as invested as I wanted to be because I was too busy being a bit confused. Then we have Mortal Follies, which I'm also gonna put in I Don't Know How to Feel, I think. This is a historic sapphic romance with a bit of fantasy to it, which sounds like it should be my kind of thing. And some people have a problem with the writing and narration in this one because it is a bit weird, but I actually enjoyed that part. I think for me it was more the pacing of the plot was kind of off. It felt like the main plot got resolved halfway through the book and then we were just kind of doing random other stuff for the rest of it. And also the relationship between the two main characters felt a little bit toxic, so weird. I don't know. Then we have Mysteries of Thorn Manor, which is a little novella that comes after Sorcery of Thorns, which I love Sorcery of Thorns so much. I think it is one of the best YA fantasies I've read, definitely. This was cute. This was a solidly good time. I think Sorcery of Thorns could have stood on its own very easily, but this was still fun and we got to learn a little bit more about some of the characters' endings. I think if you really enjoyed Sorcery of Thorns, you would enjoy this, but it's not necessary for the experience. Then we have With the Fire on High, which I'm gonna put in a solidly good time, I think. I enjoyed this. This is a young adult novel, contemporary, about a teenage mother who really wants to be a chef. I enjoyed it. I do think Elizabeth Acevedo is a good writer, and I'd like to read some of her verse in the future. I think this is one of her only novels not written in verse. It was a little bit choppy for me, I'd say, but I think that's probably largely because I'm just not the target audience. You know, I think I would have probably eaten this up as a teenager, which is who it's aimed for, so that makes sense. Then we have Nightlights. I really enjoyed this. This is a kid's graphic novel. It's almost like a picture book, really, but this had more depth to it than I expected it to. I'm gonna pop this kind of near the top of a solidly good time, I would say. This kind of ended up going into kind of the gifted and talented kid syndrome, or at least that was how I interpreted it. I think you could take away several different things from this one. And obviously it was very short, so maybe if it had been longer it might go higher, but I was definitely pleasantly surprised by how deep this one was and the themes that it explored. And I think there is a sequel, so I want to get to that one soon as well. Then we have The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love. I just love this book. I had such a fun time with it. It is a kind of fantasy of manners, which I just adore, in a version of our world with magical birds, and there's just such a whimsical romance, and it's silly and fun, and yeah, no, I had a great time with this one. It was really, really close to being a new all-time favorite, so it's gonna have to go at the top of Finally Some Good Food, I guess. But I wouldn't be surprised if I had a new all-time favorite from India Holton in the future, because I think she just writes with so much wit. This was so funny. Then we have Old Enough, which is a book that's a little bit out of my comfort zone. This is a contemporary, I guess, literary fiction. I don't know if this would be called literary fiction, but it's kind of about the queer space in a university, but also about dealing with trauma. It goes to some pretty heavy places, but it also has a lot of moments of levity and community and joy, and I had a really good time with this one. I'm gonna put this one in Finally Some Good Food, I think, but probably nearer to the end. Then we have Paladin's Grace. This was my first T. Kingfisher I read right at the start of the year, and I really, really enjoyed this one. This is definitely going in Finally Some Good Food. Ooh, let's pop it here. This made me laugh out loud on several occasions. It is one of her more romance heavy books, and I really like the way that T. Kingfisher writes romance, because again, we have a male main character who is pretty beefy. He's very strong and powerful, but he is just a bit of a cupcake on the inside. He's very sweet and soft and gentle, and I love that for a male lead in a romance. But it was also really funny, a little bit creepy at times, and I really enjoyed the side characters as well. There were some really great side characters in here that I think we see more of later in the series, so excited for that. Then we have Hello Beautiful, which I'm also gonna put in Finally Some Good Food. I was recommended this when I did a video asking for your favorite books of the year, and I read this one and it was very out of my comfort zone. This is properly literary fiction, I would say. It's kind of a retelling of Little Women. It's about 4 sisters and a man who comes into their lives. This was devastating. I think it couldn't be a favorite for me because it was a bit too devastating, and I don't tend to actually enjoy the process of reading a sad book, even though I could tell it was like incredibly well written. I think someone just started drilling something outside. I'm so sorry. We persevere. So that's why this wouldn't be an all-time favorite for me, but I know that this is a really, really good book, and I would definitely recommend it to people who enjoy devastating literary fiction. Then we have Even Though I Knew the End. This is a little novella set in the 1920s, I think, and it's a sapphic romance with fantasy, a bit of a mystery. I really enjoyed this one. I think it was a bit short for me to fully attach to these characters, so I could have enjoyed it more if it had been longer, but I was really in that time period. I thought that the characterization of a voice for that time period, especially for a lesbian in that time period, it was written really well. Then we have Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood, who is a booktuber slash just kind of YouTube person who I watched for a long time, so I was kind of nervous to read this one in case I didn't like it, but I really did enjoy this one. I'm gonna pop this one in finally some good food, I think. Even though I did have a couple of issues with it, I think that the romance wasn't what I wanted from it. I think honestly this book would have been better without the romance in there. I don't know if that's a controversial take. I don't think it is. But this was lovely and cozy and witchy, and I really enjoyed the use of magic to explore potential and having kind of lost your enthusiasm for kind of fulfilling your own potential and learning to get that back. I thought that was a great metaphor and very kind of healing. And this was also, again, the perfect balance for me between cozy and things happening, so I was still engaged with the plot. I was very impressed. I thought this was very well written. Then we have When I Arrived at the Castle, which I think is one of the only books on this list that I haven't talked about online. I think I mentioned that I was going to read it, but I haven't talked about it since I read it, and I really liked this. This is a graphic novel about someone going to take out a vampire at their castle, but it becomes very kind of experimental and weird, and the art is gorgeous. It's really, really atmospheric, and I really liked the kind of turn that it took. I think I would need to reread this 1 or 2 times before I kind of fully grasped what was going on. I think I got the gist of it, but I had a really good time with this one. I'm gonna pop this in a solidly good time, but like near the top. Then we have Ruthless Vows. I'm gonna put this near the top of I Don't Know How to Feel. This series as a whole, for me, I enjoyed, but again, I think it was hindered a bit by my expectations because everyone was obsessed with these books and I just kind of thought they were alright. I don't know, I think I was just missing something, and I think the second book as well I probably didn't enjoy quite as much as the first. Honestly, I just kind of felt like the ending of Divine Rivals was a bit silly. It just didn't work for me, so I wanted to finish the series because it was only a duology, so I may as well, but maybe my reading experience was skewed by the fact that I didn't enjoy the ending of the first book, if that makes sense. But I had a decent time. I don't think it was badly written on a writing level. I think that Rebecca Ross can write, but the plot of this one was kind of weird for me. Then we have Silver in the Wood, which I really enjoyed. This is a novella about kind of the green man archetype. I really enjoyed this one. I think largely because I loved the audiobook and the narrator of the audiobook. I would definitely recommend that. I don't think I was as attached to the characters as I would have liked to be, but again, it's just novellas. They rarely fully hit for me. I will enjoy them, so this is going in a solidly good time, but I don't think there are many novellas out there that have managed to kind of latch onto my soul in the way that a novel might. Then we have Spear, which I think similarly, this was a novella retelling of, I don't know if it was a retelling so much as just set in the Arthurian period. Honestly, I don't know enough about the original Arthurian legends to know if this was a retelling or not. This was sapphic, which I enjoyed, and it had quite a blunt storytelling style, I would say. But again, I don't think I was invested in the way that I would have been in a full-length novel, but I did have fun. So a solidly good time. Then we have Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. This is a memoir by a British comedian. This was really big in the UK, and I don't know if it has kind of gone further afield in the same way, but a lot of the people I knew in the UK were reading this one. This was really interesting. I'm gonna put it in a solidly good time, I think. I always feel weird rating a memoir. This was really interesting because it talks about Fern growing up with autism but no one diagnosing her with it, and then the difference that a diagnosis has made both good and bad, and the relationship between that and her time now currently as a comedian. Definitely interesting. I'd say if you enjoyed I'm Glad My Mom Died, then you'd probably enjoy this one too, because it's got that kind of darkness to it. It's quite heavy at times, but it's done in kind of a snarky, funny way. So kind of a weird one to rate, honestly, but I'm gonna pop it in a solidly good time. Then we have Mooncakes, which I'm gonna put it in I Don't Know How to Feel, but I can't tell you why. This was a graphic novel about a witch and a werewolf. I don't know, I think I was just expecting something different to what I got from this one. It wasn't cozy in the way that I'd been hoping for, and I didn't quite connect to the characters in the way that I want to, but I think that was me. That was my personal taste rather than necessarily anything actually being wrong with this graphic novel. But I kind of had mixed feelings about it. Then we have The Illumination of Ursula Flight, which I loved. This was so good. This introduced me to historical fiction, really. I wouldn't have read this if I hadn't been recommended it, but it was so well written. It's set in like the 1600s and we just follow a girl's life and she wants to be a playwright, and because of that some of the book is written in script format and lots of different kinds of formats. It's very experimental in the way it's written, I think, and I had a great time. It was also interesting from a writer's perspective, I think. I enjoyed it extra because I was appreciating what I was learning from it as a writer. So definitely that's going very near the top of finally some good food. Then we have The Orange by Wendy Cope, the poetry collection, which I'm gonna put in a solidly good time, probably near the bottom. I had fun with it, but it just hasn't really stuck with me that much. I like the poem The Orange itself, but I can't remember that much from the rest of it. I think this was a good kind of introduction back into poetry for me, but I don't think it had that much depth to it, at least in a way that I could relate to. Then we have The Prisoner's Throne. I should probably do The Stolen Heir as well. This is the duology that comes after The Cruel Prince, which I read in 2023 and adored. I'm gonna do The Stolen Heir. Let me find it, there we go. The Stolen Heir, I'm definitely putting like, I'm gonna put this at finally some good food, I think. I had a really good time with this one. I loved the main character that we were following. She was flawed in the kind of way that I enjoy, but internally was a bit softer than she was expressing on the outside, which is a kind of character type that I really love to read from. But then the second book, The Prisoner's Throne, was told from a different perspective, which I wasn't expecting, and I didn't like it as much, and it meant we saw less of the main character from the first book, and I missed her. So I still had fun. I'm gonna put that in a solidly good time, but I didn't enjoy it as much as The Stolen Heir. But I do find Holly Black's books just really devourable. I really race through them. I think they're really a cure for a reading slump for me. Is it just one adult book that she's done? The Book of Night, is that her only adult one? I don't know, but I've not heard great things. I don't know, tell me if I should try that or not. Then we have The Secret Life of Fungi, which I'm gonna put in I don't know how to feel, I think. I did enjoy this, but it again just wasn't what I wanted from it. It was a little book, a little non-fiction book on fungi, which I'm really interested in and I wanted to learn more, but I would say that this was a bit too flowery, which is crazy for me to say. I love flowery, but maybe I'm beginning to learn I like it less in non-fiction. I felt like the ratio of fun facts to kind of just talking about how cool mushrooms are wasn't quite right for what I wanted. I wanted more fun facts from this one. Then we have Out of Love by Hazel Hayes. I'm gonna put this in a solidly good time. I had fun with this. It was a strange one because again it's written by a YouTuber who I watched a lot as a teenager, and because of that I could kind of tell that this is basically a memoir. Maybe not fully, it's definitely rewritten, but there were a lot of moments in here that linked back to what I knew from YouTube. So I think that altered my perspective of it because it is meant to be a fiction romance book, but I did have fun with it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was well written and it did make me quite emotional, so clearly it did the job. Then we have The Secret Sunshine Project. This is really cute. This is a middle grade, which I didn't read much of last year. I'd like to read more middle grade this year, I think. But this is about a family that is going through a tough time because the father in this family passed away, and the last good day they spent together was London Pride last year because the older sister had just come out and the younger sister now wants to kind of cheer everyone up by hosting Pride in the new little town that they've had to move to for the summer, and it's just so wholesome. This was really sweet. I'm gonna definitely put this in a solidly good time. Then we have Six Deaths of the Saint, which I may get bullied for even putting on here because it's only like 30 pages long, but I'd heard such good things about this one and it did not let me down. I'm gonna put this in finally some good food. This packs such a punch in such a short space of time. This is a little fantasy short story by Alex E. Harrow, but I had a great time. This was quite experimental in the way that it was written, which I really appreciated. And I think this is one that I would reread in the future. Then we have The Midnight Bargain, the first of my new all-time faves. I just adored this. This is a fantasy of manners, which, I mean, almost enough said, but this had everything I could want. The magic system was really interesting, and it meant that integral to the story was a lot of discussion of women's rights, and the romance was brilliant. All of the side characters were brilliant. There were times where I was furious reading this, but it also had such an incredibly satisfying ending. Again, the audiobook is wonderful. Maura Quirk reads so well and does amazing voices for all of these characters. Highly, highly recommend this book, and I want more people to read it. It needs more love. Then we have the Dragon Tea Society? Yes, Society. This is the second in the Tea Dragon series. I enjoyed this. I'm gonna put it in a solidly good time. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one. I think because there were honestly fewer tea dragons in it than expected. It was still cute, and I did like some of the themes that were explored. There was a lot of exploration of expectations and not living up to those, but there weren't as many dragons as I wanted. That's what I want from this series, and I didn't get them. But I am still looking forward to reading the third book in this trilogy. I'm pretty sure it's a trilogy. Then we have The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. I am so glad that my boyfriend got me to read this book. This is his favourite book, I think, ever, and he has been ranting at me to get to it for some time, so I finally did, and this is going in finally some good food. I love this book. It is a fantasy romance, but it's also just some of the weirdest and most fun world building that I've read in some time. I love the romance part of it, but I thought that the fantasy part was a lot better than expected, and it was also really funny. There were some wonderful side characters in here, so probably one of my favourite characters in any book I've ever read was in this book, just as a side character. Then we have Those Who Wait. This is a giant sapphic romance. It's so long. I don't know why it was as long as it was, but I did have a really good time reading it. I wouldn't say it was the best written book I've ever read, but it made me cry on the bus, so I'm gonna put it in a solidly good time. I think around here. This is a romance between someone who's recently kind of come to terms with their sexuality and someone who is very much a lesbian, but she's also not publicly out because she's a politician, and I thought that was a really interesting aspect to it. I basically binge read this one, even though it was as long as it was, so I mean, it has to go in a solidly good time at least. Then we have Untethered Sky. Yeah, that's what it's called, by Fonda Lee, which was my first Fonda Lee. I hadn't really thought that the Jade Saga would appeal to me as much, but this one did because it's about a girl who becomes a griffin rider, and I love me an animal familiar. I really enjoyed this. I would say of the novellas that I read this year, this was probably my favourite, other than maybe Thornhedge. I did really like Thornhedge, but this had a very satisfying ending to it. So definitely a solidly good time. I would really recommend this one if you want kind of a shorter fantasy. I wouldn't say it was action-packed, but the characters were interesting, and especially the relationship between the main character and her rock. That's what they're called, rocks, not griffins. They are different. It's basically just a big bird, but cool. Then we have Sisters of Sword and Shadow. This is respectfully no. Oh, I was really disappointed by this book. I was so excited for it because it's not an Arthurian retelling, but it's basically what would happen if there was a round table like in the Arthurian legends, but it was all women. And I said, sign me up, I'm so pumped. And then it wasn't it. It wasn't what I wanted from it, but it also, I just don't think it knew its genre very well. This is written by someone who normally writes non-fiction about feminism. Laura Bates, she's quite a famous non-fiction writer, at least in the UK. I don't know if she's as famous in the US, but I just don't think she knew the young adult fantasy genre that well, because she kept kind of hinting at things and leading us towards tropes of what would happen in that genre, and then nothing would come of it. And it wasn't like the trope was being subverted, it was just left. And it was just a big anticlimax for me, unfortunately, this one. I don't think on a writing level it was bad, it was more on a plot and thematic level, I would say, that it just didn't quite work, I don't think. Which was a shame because I was so excited. Then we have Lightfall, the first in a graphic novel series for kids, but I loved this. This is definitely going in, I think it's probably going to go in finally some good food. This is the story of a young girl who meets a Goldurian, which is a species that most people think have died out, and they have to go on a journey together to find her uncle who's gone missing. But they're both really endearing characters, and it also represents anxiety really well in the illustration format, which was really cool. Then we have Girl, Goddess, Queen, which I think I'm gonna put at the top of I don't know how to feel. I did enjoy this, and I don't think there's anything objectively wrong with this book. It just really wasn't what I expected of it. I thought it was gonna be a fun, silly little romance, and that wasn't what it was at all. This is a retelling of Hades and Persephone, but from a very feminist viewpoint, which is great. We love that. That's not the problem, but the romance just wasn't as much of a part of it as I was hoping it would be. That was what I was kind of craving at the time. And I did find the main character to be a bit frustrating at times in her decision making. I liked that she stood up for herself, and I did think this had a great discussion around consent in many different aspects, but it just wasn't what I wanted from it. I know a lot of people who love this book, so this doesn't mean anything objectively about the book. But then we have The Tainted Cup, which to absolutely no one's surprise is going right at the top of my all-time favorite. This was my favorite book of the year, and I will never shut up about it. It introduced me to fantasy mystery as a subgenre, and I had the time of my life. It was wonderful. Endearing characters, creepy plant magic, just brilliant. Then we have Little Thieves, which I think is one of the only other books I haven't talked about online. I read this towards the end of the year. I just wanted kind of a fun fantasy, and this is a YA series. This is the first one in a series. It's a retelling of The Goose Girl. The main character has kind of stolen a princess's identity, and she is very flawed. This is very much a story of her growth as a character. I enjoyed this. I'm gonna put this in a solidly good time. I really liked that character growth being a main aspect of this one, and I liked the snark of our main character. She was a really fun perspective. I also loved how ingrained queerness was in this fantasy society. It was very normalized, which I enjoyed. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series. I would love your opinion if you have read the rest of the series, because I kind of just enjoyed the first book as it was. I know that there was potential for it to go further, and I know that the series has continued, but what would you say? Would you say the series gets better as it goes on? Let me know. Then we have Starling House. I enjoyed this. I'm gonna put it in a solidly good time, but it wasn't my favorite. It did go deeper into subjects than I expected. I kind of thought it would just be a very well written book, but it was more a discussion on the American South and on industrialization and capitalism and the effect that that has on marginalized groups, which I appreciated because I did not expect that to be explored going in. But I wouldn't say that the writing captured me in the way that I was hoping it would. I thought this would be a bit more Starless Sea vibes than it was, but I did enjoy it. Then we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. I'm gonna put this in a solidly good time. I had fun with this. I had fun, but I was expecting to adore it because it's Emily Henry, and I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. I think I just didn't relate to these characters in the way that I have for other characters she's written. And it's funny because I know a lot of people, this is their favorite Emily Henry book. I think it's such a personal thing. It depends on if you can see yourself in those people, and I just couldn't with this one, but I still had fun. Then we have The Misadventures of an Amateur Naturalist. This is a sapphic retelling of Beauty and the Beast, where the main character is a naturalist who's obsessed with the study of animals. They really want to become a scholar, but this is set kind of in the time in France that Beauty and the Beast would have been set. So of course that isn't what women of the time tended to do. They were just kind of married off. This was a strange one because it didn't do what I was expecting it to do. The romance really wasn't as big a part of this as you would expect from a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It was a lot more about our main character and her relationship with her sister, the time period, but I had a really fun time with it. I think that the narrator was brilliant. They did a wonderful French accent, and if I hear anything in a French accent, I'm gonna enjoy it more than I would have done otherwise. And I think I'm learning that I really like historical fiction. I just like the vibes of being in an older time period. So it's strange. I have mixed feelings, but I am gonna put it in a solidly good time because I enjoyed myself, even though it didn't really do what it said it was gonna do. Then we have Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, the second Emily Wilde book. Emily Wilde. I didn't enjoy this as much as the first book. I still had a great time with it, but I think I just expected a lot because I devoured that first book, and this one took me a little bit longer to get into. I enjoyed the second half more. I think objectively the pacing probably was better in this one, but for some reason the first book worked a bit better for me. I think getting to know the characters I really enjoyed, but I am still looking forward to the next one, and I enjoy Emily and Wendell as characters immensely. So a solidly good time. And then last but not least, we have Gideon the Ninth. This is going up in Finally Some Good Food. I struggled with this one because I expected so much from it, probably too much, and it didn't quite meet those expectations, which were basically that it was going to change my life. But I had a wonderful time with it. I thought it was really interesting. This is a fantasy sci-fi crossover about necromancy. It's very creepy at times, and there's a lot of kind of gross bone magic and gore, but our main character is incredibly snarky. They have very dark, blunt humor, which I really enjoyed. And again, this was narrated by the same person. The audiobook was narrated by the same person as The Midnight Bargain was, and I love them as a narrator. There's quite a big cast in here and they did a brilliant job. So definitely Finally Some Good Food. So that is my final ranking of all 56 books I read this year. As you can see, there are a lot in that kind of middle category that I enjoyed, but they didn't quite hit. And there aren't that many that I disliked. There are some that I did have mixed feelings about, definitely. But only 2 new all-time favorites. I would love for that to be higher in 2025, but it's really something that I just can't predict, and I have to accept that about myself. But I'm still so proud of myself for reading 56 books in a year, as someone who is just a chronically slow reader, even though a good chunk of these were novellas or graphic novels, but we won't talk about that. Thank you so much for watching and for being here if you have throughout my 2024. I hope that your reading has gone off to a good start in 2025. Honestly, mine has been a little bit questionable, but I'm determined to start again in February as we're getting to the end of January. February is going to be my month. I'm going to read some great books. It's going to happen. But thank you again for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye.